Listen, before we roll, I've never done this before, so I apologize, but I'm waiting on a shipment of records and they need to be signed for. So I have a security camera. I'm watching the front door because, and the crazy thing is if I don't sign for them, then I have to wait 3 days and they're taken to this like somewhere in the depths of the city that like, for me to go retrieve, it is a nightmare. So anyway,
I know exactly how that goes. I have the same thing with cassettes where it's like, if I'm not home to sign for my cassettes, sometimes they get sent to the USPS or the UPS place like right down the street from my house.
Yeah.
But sometimes they'll just send them to like a random auto parts shop, you know, like it's just like, what the hell? Like, I don't want to drive like 40 minutes to go pick up my cassette tapes.
Yes. And they're in like wherever I have to go is always like bad parking and like super sketchy. And the hours are always like, they're open for like 30 minutes once a month. Yeah. It's like, Okay. Totally. Thanks for understanding. Totally. Yeah. So if I like drop the mic and run, I'll be back.
I know what you're doing. Totally.
Okay. Sounds good. Now, another thing I'll say is I don't normally talk about musicians or music on this podcast, ironically. And I think our listeners have gotten used to that because that's your job. Like the label's job is to talk about the music. I want to give label owners like yourself a day in the spotlight. Having said that, this Life of Johnny record, I was just kind of listening through a bunch of things today and like, you know, just sometimes like something just like fits right in that narrow little keyhole in your mind, like musically. And anyway, I'm really excited to like deep dive into that. I played it like once through, but love that record.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Johnny's a serious head and, he has a way of really like enveloping you in his world for sure.
Yeah. Oh, and you know, not just lyrically, but production wise too.
Yeah, totally. I've heard that because I guess that record came to me, I guess, pretty late in the making. Johnny's like a friend now, but was like a friend of a friend for a while. So he sent me just the most recent incarnation of the record, but I guess he'd been working on it for like a long time and had gone through like many different versions before it ended up as this kind of like maximalist, like really highly produced thing.
Sure.
Like for a while it was kind of like a lo-fi folk thing. Then it was kind of like a punk-ish record. And then it kind of slowly transitioned into this more just kind of like lush, thing that we ended up with.
That's really cool to hear.
Yeah.
Quick question. Is there some sort of Pacific Northwest label collective or in Portland? Like I had heard about something like this back in 2018 when I started the show. There was a couple labels like Kill Rock Stars were in it, I think, and Party Damage. I'm just curious if you know anything about that or maybe if you just have other label friends that you get together with. Right. Because it's a very label heavy part of the country.
Totally. Yeah. I think it was kind of from before my time, but I was on, I don't want to rep this label too much because they did kind of fall out with all of their artists and it wasn't great.
That's fair.
But there was a record label that my friends and I we had a couple bands that were on it. And they were kind of a part of some collective of a couple different record labels. I think like Fluff and Gravy and Mama Bird and some of those. And they would kind of have like meetings together and sometimes like tabling events together.
Yeah.
And the like, but yeah. So, and they would do like shows. Like there's one show that this band Maureen that I was in played where we played like a very disparate bill where it was like we were like the indie rock band and then there was like a secret drum band which was kind of like a cult, like a super group of drummers in Portland. There are like there's a major proliferation of record labels in Portland for sure. Right. And everyone's kind of got their own little niche, it seems.
Well, so you don't really do that anymore. You don't get together. It's not like a bi-monthly meeting or anything.
Yeah. I'm kind of outside of the general like record label scene here. A lot of them are kind of older than I am. I'm in my late 20s and I only really started this record label when I was in college.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I know what you mean. And that actually ends up happening. The funny thing is that I love the idea of a label collective and I would encourage anyone to do it. The problem is that like when it's productive and it's when, I mean, it's hard, right? But like when you have people who are all like-minded, then it works. But then if somebody comes in who isn't necessarily like-minded, or a different demographic, or a different age, or a different objective, or even different genres, where it's like, oh, hold on a second, that doesn't apply to our world, you know what I mean? Or what we want to do doesn't apply to your world. And I've noticed that in our own Facebook community of record labels. It's like there's like a batch of people who all get along, and then there's some people who are kind of like outside of the clique because of whatever. Anyway, so I love the idea of a label collective, but I can understand how it could be just difficult to maintain long term without splintering off, you know?
Everyone's got their different ways of doing things, and like, you know, I'm a big fan of this local label called Beacon Sound. I don't know if you know of them.
No.
They're like a local like experimental label. They do mostly like vinyl releases. Started out as a guy's like record shop. And then he started using that as kind of like a front for and a pool for putting out records and stuff. And he's like intensely anti-capitalist in a very like in your face kind of way, which I kind of am more like. I don't really like, you know, spout my anti-capitalist nonsense all the time, but he's like really in your face about it. So I can see like if he ended up in the same room as a bunch of other record labels or whatever, people would be like, whoa, dude, okay, we are all like selling goods here, my man.
No, exactly. I think it totally falls apart that way. I think it's totally true, because everybody is on that spectrum. Some people are and I think that happens whenever, like, especially people who want to just kind of stay hobbyists, but then you get a hit record and all of a sudden like people want to license it from you, and now you're making money, and you know, it's difficult. It's so difficult.
Yeah, totally. And of course, that's something that I've definitely experienced before. You know, definitely put out a hit record that sold more than 200 cassettes or whatever.
That's funny. So tell me the history of your label.
Yeah, totally. So it started out in, it was 2017. I was in college. I was coming up in like DIY, or it was kind of nascent DIY, where, you know, people were starting to sign with kind of larger labels, put out records. And so I had a couple friends in town who were kind of looking into doing that. And I had this record that I was making that was kind of a new project for me. I was like writing songs on guitar, which was kind of first thing, which ended up being my old band, which is no longer around, called World Record Winner. And I had this record of like 4-track recordings and stuff that my friends all really liked. And they were like, yeah, you should send this around to a bunch of places. And I was like, sure. So I did the whole schlepping process of like, you know, like sending around to a bunch of places, and was kind of like ghosted or just like rejected from pretty much all of them. But there was one record label that I can't believe I'm forgetting the name of it now. It was run by the Slash Tires guy and like a bunch of the people from Lake, who are a local like Pacific Northwest band. Okay. And they hit me back just being like, this is a fake thing. We just like have a record label for us to put out like our friends' releases and stuff. You should just do that. And I was like, oh yeah, like sure. That sounds awesome. Like, yeah, I should just like, all you need is like a name. I already had a tape duplicator at the time because I'd made a couple tapes for like my old like synth pop project when I was like a freshman in college. So I was just like, yeah, I'll just do that. And I had this little pin that I had written Bud on for no reason. I don't really know why. And I just thought that was kind of a cool name for it. So I did that, made like 25 tapes or something. I think I bought cassettes from someone on Craigslist. Like someone had like 100 cassettes. Like from NAC that they hadn't used and were selling them on Craigslist. Another
failed tape label.
Right, exactly, in Portland, classic. So I bought those and just made like 25 tapes. I pretty much had to give them all away. I don't think anyone really wanted to like buy them. I think I maybe sold. There's one head who still follows me on Bud, who was like the only person that ever bought the tape on Bandcamp, and they lived in like Iowa or something. Okay. That was, I think, the only tape I sold on the internet. The rest of them I just had to give away to friends or whatever.
Let's pause this story for 1 second,
Yeah.
if I can. The origin story is exactly the same as mine. And in that, like, you know, if the history of my label would go back over 20 years, if you counted when I just like doodled a logo name on the back of my CDs or whatever. But it's, you know, the official length is not that long, but so many people have done that. I think it was interesting though. What was your thought process? Because I did it because I just wanted to appear cool. And you're right. Like nobody was responding to my manila envelopes. So what did you think when they said that to you? Were you like, whoa, no, I want a real record deal. I don't want a cosplay record deal.
Yeah. No, for me, it was this really exciting peek behind the curtain.
Yeah.
In a sense of like running a record label is always something I was really like interested in doing. Mm-hmm. You know, I had grown up in Seattle DIY like before I was in bands and shit, but it was just like when I was in high school and stuff. And there were a lot of Northwest labels just putting out cassettes and stuff, like Lost Sound tapes.
Yeah.
There's one called like, I think Gorgonzola or Giganzilla. It was like GGZL. They put out a lot of just like garage stuff. And yeah, I like loved that kind of stuff, but I thought that you had to like do something crazy or like be some sort of big name to have a label. So like the idea that I could just start a record label was a really exciting thing for me. And it was definitely, not about, you know, wanting to, you know, have some sort of big aspirations or anything. It was more like this idea that I could like foster a community or something, or, you know, like be able to help out friends in my immediate scene who like, you know, I love their band and I feel like literally nobody listens to their band. So like to be able to have like a cheerleader role in that sense.
That's one of the best roles really of the label. Well, and so going back to this fake label thing, this label that you submitted your album to, they fooled you. So like whatever it is, it worked that you thought they were legitimate enough that you wanted to humble yourself, submit the music, and hopefully be signed to their label. So right there, it was proof of concept.
Right.
Okay, so unpause.
Totally,
Go back. And continue.
Right. Okay, so where was I? So yeah, I made a couple tapes, had to give most of them away.
I had like two more like really low-key releases that I did over the course of that was like 2017, like end of 2017. And over the next 2 years or so, or 3 years, I put out like two releases, two very little. Yeah. I think one release was one that I made. It was another world record winner album. And I was like, it's going to be tape only. And I'll just make the tapes if people buy them. And nobody did. So I didn't make them. And then later on, once Bud kind of takes off and people are buying tapes, people were trying to buy them, and I was like, "Oh my god, I never even made these."
So smart, so smart. That is so funny.
But yeah, anyway, so like, you know, fast forward, it's right before like beginning of 2020. We didn't really know like COVID was coming and stuff. But kind of randomly in like February or January, I was talking to my friend Addie, who had a new band called Flip Chuck, and they were like kind of wondering what to do with this new EP that they just recorded, and they just didn't even know I had a label. But I was like, oh, hey, yeah, I have this thing where I can make a couple of cassettes for you guys and just give you a couple for free, and then I sell the rest, pay myself back. And they were like, that sounds sick. Let's do that in April. You know, we'll plan a release show and all this stuff. And then, of course, none of that happened. But we still put out the tape. And because everyone was like trapped at home, I was running these live stream events kind of around that on the Instagram for Bud. And that just kind of made it take off. And we sold out like 2 runs of the tape.
Wow.
And then from there, it was like, it just kind of like snowballed into like me putting out. I was unemployed at the time. I'd worked at a children's museum before COVID. So I was just like, I have all this time. If anyone has a record that they've been sitting on forever, like I just kind of like any of my friends was like, if you have a record you've been sitting on forever and you want to put out, like I will just put it out like pretty much sight unseen. I just like love all you guys and would love to help out. And then that kind of just like exploded. And I put out, I think like 20 or so releases in that year.
Wow.
Like way too much.
Yeah, that's incredible. And were you doing all prints on demand, or were you doing like a small batch stuff? When did you have you ever switched to like full orders from NAC or duplication? Or?
Right. Yeah, I did recently have done that, but for the longest time, especially in the early days of the label, in my like anti-capitalist kind of eco-punk ideology at the time, I was buying only recycled cassettes. I was doing like, going on eBay and finding, there's a whole essay in it, but the crux between church cassette culture and DIY cassette culture is very linked in a bizarre way. But so I was finding these old stock church cassettes that people were selling for like nothing, that still had old like church labels on them and stuff.
Were they blank or did they have like a sermon on it?
They were blank. Like they hadn't even gotten around to duplicating them yet.
Yes.
And probably were voice quality too, so they were terrible sounding.
That's true.
But I was getting them for like 5 cents or 10 cents a tape or something, and then just kind of duplicating them myself at home. They were all like 90-minute tapes too, so I'd usually do like a full-size record on each side so people could listen.
Emmett, I a couple years ago I was walking by this place, this building where they filmed. They used in the 90s. They used to film like a TV evangelist, and I think they used to sell the episodes on cassette, like to their mail order fans.
Right.
And there was in the garbage dump, there was like sky high white cassettes. I don't know the length, probably like 60 or 90.
Right.
And I was like so taken aback, and I didn't know if they were blank or not, but the outside was like pure white. I still have hundreds of them kicking around. And I just like grabbed a handful and I felt like I felt weird, and like, but I grabbed a handful. I regret not grabbing them all because there may have been 200 or 300 there, and I maybe grabbed 25.
Right.
But I know exactly what you're talking about, and they were blank. They were kind of crap quality, but they were clean and beautiful. And so here we are. Look at that.
Yeah, totally. Because I think there was some sort of weird boom, kind of like, because they were kind of after the cassette like tapers era.
Yes,
it was like, always like the kind of older Christian audience is always like very much after whatever is in vogue. So like they're like, oh, like in 1998, they're like, oh, cassettes are the thing now.
Yeah.
Like we should buy thousands of them and we'll sell them to all of our audience and whatever, and we'll tape every sermon and sell each one.
You know what it was? I think it was also too, it was like they were for shut-ins who couldn't make it to church anymore, like elderly people. So they would have had like a little boom box that, and they wouldn't have upgraded to a CD player. So that's so interesting. There's a great article for Pitchfork on that.
Exactly.
Like, yes, please write that. The church
one
tape
day
crossover.
I'll figure that kind of thing out. There must be some sort of connection there.
If only they knew what was being put on those tapes afterwards.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
If
They'd
only
be
they knew.
pissed off.
Sorry, I keep interrupting this story here.
Oh, Continue. No, it's cool. I think that was kind of the end of it. So yeah, it just kind of snowballed from there. I put out a lot of stuff.
And so did you, we talked about after the church tapes, did you go to like full scale duplication?
Right. Yeah. In the last year or so, I've been working like, full-time or almost full-time retail since like, I think I went back to work near the end of 2020 or the beginning of 2021.
Yeah.
And after that, I was keeping up my release schedule and still trying to like duplicate at home. And I was actually starting to buy just like blank cassettes from Duplication Canada. And doing that and still duplicating at home. And then I had various duplicators, like, stereo ones. And I was doing like double cassette decks.
Wow.
And and then I started having problems with those and like just ripping out my hair over these like failing machines. Because they're in this age now where it's like all of the parts in them, like all the components are failing because they're around like 20 or 30 years old.
And the rubber's melting and disintegrating. And
exactly. I was changing belts and stuff and that wasn't doing the trick. It was like, certain electrical components were failing. So it would be like one cassette would duplicate normal, the next one wouldn't. So then I was checking every tape and like just losing my mind. Anyway, my partner was like at some point, and I think my parents too, like I would complain so much about this. They were like, you just need to make like professionals do this for you.
Well, and like, the price isn't that different. Like when it comes to pulling your hair out.
I know, right? When I looked at what it would cost, I was like, dear God, I can't believe I've been doing this.
I
just
know.
for like 50 cents a tape or whatever.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's
so-
well, good for you. Now,
Yeah.
what did you notice? Like, it's funny because I like getting them professionally duplicated. I find it to be affordable and easy and fast.
Right.
But
Totally.
as a music fan, as a tape fan, I kind of appreciate the handmade stuff more
Totally.
than just getting, especially if you're like me, I skimp on the duplication process. So I save money on single J card, nothing on the other side.
Right.
I skimp on that side. Whereas like my friends from Painted Blonde, when they do like a tape, they do lots of little notes inside and little paintings, and everything is like super custom. So like, did you notice kind of like fans being, I don't know, like what were fans' reception to like going from these handmade ones that come with your hair and blood in them to like manufactured?
I think the thing that I realized and that was kind of crazy to me was like nobody really at the end of the day, I was still just printing out J cards at home and cutting them myself.
Yeah.
And you know, it like, I think fans were honestly more stoked because I had less people hitting me up being like, hey, my tape gets warbly near the end of side B or whatever.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It was like people had cassettes that actually sounded really good. And
that's
I still
good.
do what I try to still do to make sure that I keep my like hands on it and it does feel like a handmade object still is I've always hand stamped each tape from the beginning, and I've transitioned from pre-cut letter stamps to now I hand carve a stamp for each tape. So
wow, that's awesome.
So it still does have like a slight each release will be slightly different, and like each tape even is like one of them will be better stamped than another, or one will have two stamps on it, or whatever.
Sure.
So
yeah.
They're all a little bit different even within a single run. So that, at least to myself, makes me feel at least like I'm still kind of like doing a handmade object, even though it goes through a warehouse production.
Yeah. No, I get it. That's good. So the name BudTapes, it implies that like you're a label releasing your friends' tapes. Is that still primarily true, or are you getting outside submissions? Are you allowing yourself to sign and release a band that you've never met in real life? You just like the music?
Right. It's a mix of both. Yes.
Okay.
So I usually am just putting out my friends' releases.
Yeah.
But every now and then I'll have like a friend of a friend or just a random people online send me a release that I just can't really say no to,
Yeah, sure. That's fair.
One example being my now friend, who I actually haven't met in real life, but will soon.
Yes.
My friend Greg Freeman. I just put out his album.
Okay.
He's a Vermont singer-songwriter guy, doing kind of like a heavy alt country thing.
Okay.
And his new record has been blowing up and is really, really cool. That's kind of the closest thing to like a pretty well, what's the word I'm looking for? It was received very well, and we sold a lot of cassettes of it. But I can't remember what I was getting at. Oh yeah, I didn't know him before that. I just heard my friend Garrett, who lives out there, he lives in Maine, had seen Greg a couple times. He was like, you gotta check out this guy, Greg Freeman. His shit is so cool. He had like one single out at the time. And then somehow randomly Greg just sent me his whole record and was like, do you want to put this out? And I was like, holy shit, yes, my friend Garrett has told me you're awesome. Yes,
I love when that happens. Yeah, I love when that happens.
So like with those kinds of synchronicities, like that will always be something that I'm down to put out. I very rarely will just put out something that's completely random out of the blue.
Yeah. No, that's fair. What does a release have to do to tip over into something you want to release or you have to release? Like aside from the follow-up records from artists that are already on your roster, what are the characteristics of a release that makes it a Bud tape? Do you know that?
Right. Yeah, I think I'm very like non-genre specific. I like to just put out kind of whatever, but my main like goal and something that I try to stick to as much as possible is I try to release records from people who are doing it in a really authentic sense.
Sure.
Like people who would be making this record regardless of if anyone is listening.
Yes, I know the type. Yeah.
Where it's like these are people who literally like have to make music. Like there's like it's just something that's in them.
Yeah,
They're gonna
yeah.
be making records regardless. And it's really just about like the love of the game, you know?
Yes.
Because that's what I'm doing, you know, at the end of the day too. Like
Sure.
I'm not doing BudTapes to get like rich and famous. Obviously, I would be doing something completely different if I
Yeah.
was wanting to be like that.
Yeah.
So, you know, I really want people to be kind of on the same wavelength with me of like, you know, we're not in this for like, you know, getting rich and famous. We're just here to kind of build community among like-minded people. And, you know, have a bunch of people kind of experience the same really cool music that we're making.
That's totally great. I completely agree. It's interesting you talked about not necessarily seeing yourself with a certain genre. I've asked this question a million times to labels on this show over the years. Pretty much everyone likes to think of themselves as like agnostic when it comes to like any one genre,
Right,
whether or not like we all believe it to be true when you listen to their music.
Right.
But I'm curious, like, okay, so if you think there isn't a sound, like if you are talking to a normal person, a non-music person at a party, and they find out you run a label, they're going to say, what kind of music? What do you say?
Yeah, I usually will just say like indie rock or whatever.
Yeah, I know.
I am kind of.
I say, get away from me. Go get me another drink.
Yeah, exactly. I'm the one standing in the corner that like nobody
Yeah,
knows that I run
that's right,
a
yeah.
DIY cassette label.
Everybody knows you run a DIY. That's why they're not talking.
Right. Exactly.
But this happens a lot. What would you say?
Yeah, I think I usually just say like I'm an indie rock record label, and then I put stuff out on cassette.
Yeah.
But more recently, and this hasn't even really come out yet, but maybe it will by the time this podcast has come out, but I'm starting kind of like an imprint of Bud that is leaning more. I'm trying to kind of not necessarily head more into genre, but kind of get into the weeds of like really genreless music in terms of like experimental
Very cool.
music. So I'm starting an imprint that's called Cosmic Bud. And it's going to be a series of CD releases.
Wow.
All like, you know, experimental stuff. And I'm going to do them in batches to try and, you know, save my time and stuff. And people can pick up like 3 CDs at a time or whatever.
Well, one of the things I love about that idea, and what I actually love about labels, not in the record label sense, but as in genres or names of terms, is because I feel like it simplifies our brain. And so when we hear, you know, like experimental freak jazz, it's like, I know what that is. I want more of it. Or I know what that is. Keep me away from that. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so like for people like you, and it's like lo-fi organic tape stuff. It's like, I know what that sounds like. I want to go check it out. I want to hear that. So the idea that you are actually saying we're going to focus on a genre, and even one step further than that, we're going to create a separate imprint. What was the thought process instead of saying this just comes under BudTapes? Because I personally think it's a smart move to do an imprint. And anybody listening to the three of you, like I think every label should do multiple imprints in different genres. I think it's super cool. Yeah. So what was that thought process of like, this is the fork in the road? Do we do this under BudTapes or Cosmic Bud?
I guess like the idea behind it is like I have just like my personal music making has changed a lot, and I like changed project names in my own like personal music making. I kind of have like a free improvisation group now. And with that change of mind, I was kind of finding, even though I'm so like genreless in BudTapes, I have found myself kind of pigeonholed into that party conversation genre. That if we're going back to what we said earlier, that I'm just kind of like putting out indie rock records on cassette at the end of the day. And don't get me wrong, like I love indie rock records when they're good. But I don't necessarily want to just get a million indie rock records in my email submissions all the time, you know?
That's right.
And I was kind of finding myself personally listening to not a lot of that other than what I was putting out. And listening to a lot more just like kind of out there stuff in my free time. So it felt kind of like a separate thing. Obviously, you know, Bud is just me.
Yeah.
So, it was just something where I kind of wanted to. Also, I'm a big proponent of the CD revival. So,
Amen.
I'm really trying to push that because that's kind of what I listen to mostly these days. Obviously, I have a million cassettes in my apartment that I listen to a lot, and I pick up cassettes a lot too. But in my everyday listening, I'm pretty much listening to mostly CDs.
That's cool.
I'm kind of wanting to push that idea. My friend Skylar, who's my bandmate too, used to run a CD-only label called Orange Discs.
Okay.
And I was just kind of inspired by that and wanting to kind of push this kind of alternate physical media that I feel like is really cool and doesn't get a lot of love too. So it was kind of the combination of those things, like genre and then like the actual media itself too. Felt like a totally separate thing.
I did a video about it on YouTube if CDs are coming back, and it's like people still comment on it every day, and it seems most people are in favor of the revival.
Right.
Very much
totally.
like cassettes, it has nothing to do with us. It has everything to do with like technology and who's going to provide us with the tools to play these things. But
totally.
I'm with you there. I love CDs.
It is funny too that now even people have cars that don't even have CD players in them. Like my parents have a car from like 2018 or something, and it doesn't have a CD player, which is so crazy.
Crazy,
to me.
eh? Yeah.
It feels like just this bizarre. We're in some sort of bizarre like sci-fi universe where there's
I know.
Everything's in the ether or whatever. I don't know.
Totally. When we were talking about genres and we were talking about like what qualifies a Bud release, you said authenticity, and so is that authenticity like? Where do you look for authenticity? Is it in the music? Is it in the lyrics when you meet them on Zoom, or in the album cover, in the production?
Right. It's kind of everything. Yeah. I kind of try and look for it everywhere. It's really hard to nail down, and sometimes I get it wrong. Sometimes people come off really authentic and they aren't. I'm not saying that I've found that, particularly with any specific artist, but just meeting people, sometimes you meet them right off the bat and you're like, oh, this person's real authentic into what they do, and then you kind of dig deep into them and you're like, oh, like they are really just maybe wanting to use me as like a stepping stone to something else or whatever. So it is a hard thing. I'm no expert in figuring that out, but I think usually it does just come from people being kind of just down to do whatever, really like wanting, like actually maybe knowing anything that I've put out. Also, maybe not just following me on Instagram and sending me an email the exact same day.
Oh, yeah. I know when that's coming. I know when it's coming. I see a notification. I'm like, here it comes.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, that is, something that's tacky and you shouldn't do. At the end of the day, usually it's someone who has been, like, bought a tape from me before, talked to me at a show before, and hasn't plugged their own band, or I've had to ask them about like, do you have a band or anything? Like, you seem cool. You probably have a band. So usually at the end of the day, it's that kind of interaction that gets me interested in it. Like they're like really kind of interested in what I'm doing, and I'm interested in what they're doing, and then it'll kind of work out from there.
I've never been to Portland. Or the Northwest, beyond just the edge of British Columbia.
Where are you located, Scott?
I'm in Toronto.
Oh, cool. Sweet.
Yeah.
My friend, I'm actually putting out a tape in like 2 days from my friend Jeremy, who's from Toronto.
Okay, cool. I'll look out for it. That's cool.
He's a local animator, has worked at like Leica and some other places, and he worked on that recent Pinocchio movie.
Nice.
But yeah, he is just kind of like a lo-fi, like acoustic folk indie rock record that I'm putting out in just a couple days.
Well, that's an interesting, because it kind of connects to what I want to ask you, is that I'm curious, like, we have similar, I mean, what I understand, what I've seen in photos of the Pacific Northwest is it has like a climate and a terrain that is pretty unique to the rest of North America. And what I'm curious about from a music standpoint, is that like a filter in any way that you put your releases through? I mean, even if like I could be projecting in that like all of the tracks that I played today sound nice under a canopy of trees in a damp forest. But
totally.
but at the same time, if you go to your Bandcamp, there are lots of pictures of trees. So like, is that, so maybe I'm not projecting, but is that something, the sound of Pacific Northwest, even though you're signing artists from Toronto, that you want the releases to sound like where you're from in any way? Is that stupid?
No, not at all. And I think totally, there is like, and especially that was kind of a personal my music thing, but yeah, it does really stick out to me when someone's like, music really does sound like you know, like you're under a canopy or something. Yes. I'm having to pull up my own discography to look at, but I know that I have some releases that really make me think of that. Like my friend Spencer's release from his project Generifus that I just put out. Okay. He's like a real Pacific Northwest old head. He's been around for a long time, probably like been around for like 20 years, I want to say, something like that. I was buying his records when I was in high school. Wow. Before I knew him. But he's just a real old head, and his music really just does sound like you know, the Pacific Northwest. He has this one song on the new record that's called I Didn't Even Look at the Mountain Today, which is really kind of about that feeling of living in the Northwest. You get caught up in your day-to-day life, but every now and then you realize you're just like really in this beautiful place, and you're so thankful to be there.
What a beautiful title. That that's gonna like stick with me just because it's a good metaphor, eh?
Yeah. That's crazy. Really cool. But yeah, so it definitely does play into it a little bit. And then on the counter of that too, kind of more going into what I'm gonna be putting out in the future. Portland has a really long history of noise music here. Okay. Coming from kind of the opposite of that. And the you know, the destruction of the beautiful parts of the Northwest via like urbanization and industrialization. Yeah. And Portland is like a really beautiful town, but there are parts of it that are fucking depressing, you know? And I've heard. Will really like every now and then you go and look out at these like, you know, power plants that are right in the middle of the city, and you're like, holy shit, we are like destroying this beautiful place, you know? Yeah. Sorry, I don't know if we're supposed to swear on this podcast.
No, it's fine. Absolutely. Yeah, please do.
Yeah. So so I feel like it's a combination of those two things too, of like you know, kind of the nascent stage of capitalism that we're in, where things are starting to fall apart and deteriorate, mixed with the really, really beautiful parts of living in such a beautiful part of the country.
That's really cool. Well, I'm glad that that's true, that you are acknowledge that and try to reflect it in the music. And I think it's something that not every country or state or city can do. Like it's pretty, like I don't want to disparage any city or state or country, but when you don't have like kind of a calling card, right? If you don't have that like distinct thing about where you're from, it's hard. Right. It's just a really good selling point, I think.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it definitely helps to sell the records. For sure.
There you go. Yeah, I can tell. For anyone listening to this, if you could see the background right now, he is in Emmet is a gold-plated house right now. Everything is gold.
Exactly. In my just silver-plated one.
Sales are incredible. Yeah, no, that's really cool. That's really cool. And I think I was talking about this with somebody recently. Like, so Canada is obviously massive, and there are lots of different parts to Canada. Not so much as the U.S. is diverse, but we do have like different parts of Canada. But I feel like if I were to start a Canadian label and say this is Canadian folk music, to anybody outside of Canada, they would be like, oh, cool, how quaint. Not realizing, you could almost trick them into being like, this is what life is like in Canada. Right. Even though Canada is massive and there, you know, it's not entirely homogenous. But I feel like you could almost do that too for anybody in Europe or in Japan who wants to check out a Pacific Northwest or like a Portland label. Oh, this is so cool, you know.
Yeah, totally. It is a cool thing. And you can kind of, you know, in a lot of ways, you can craft your own idea of what, you know, a Northwest album would sound like, or a Canadian album would sound like, whatever. Like a good example of that is, I don't know if you know the noise band Wolf Eyes. They're kind of like the biggest noise band.
Sounds familiar. Yeah,
they're from Detroit. Okay. And they're kind of just known as putting out like they were on Sub Pop, so they were kind of like the biggest noise band.
Right. Okay.
And it was kind of what burst that bubble in the mid-aughts. But recently they've been saying they're from Detroit. And they're saying that outside of Detroit, they lived in many different parts of Michigan.
Sure.
But they say that they're Michigan folk music or Detroit folk music, which I think is like a really cool way of like playing with genre of like this really fucked up and at sometimes like very extreme music is this kind of like using these quaint terms to describe that is really cool. I like that.
You know what? It's so funny because when we think of Michigan and the troubles that they've had in Flint and in Detroit, years ago, and so when you think of struggle, and then you think of like it absolutely paints a picture, and you're like, I want to hear this music right now because it begins to tell a story, something that you can't do if you are Orlando, Florida folk music. It's like, what? I think I know what that sounds like. I'll wait till I'm retired to listen to that. But so that is really cool. Even though it's all BS, it's really cool.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, genre is just this kind of like self-mythologization. What's the word? Like you're just self-mythologizing your own ideas of what your music is.
Totally. Totally. One question going back to 2020. So 2020, you used this opportunity to stay at home to be productive. How did you sustain that? I mean, there is a graveyard of podcasts on Apple Podcasts from the 2020 era. How did you kind of keep going with that and growing from that point as opposed to being like, back to normal, forget the label?
Yeah, I think it's because I got this like fire under my butt. You know, it was like this cool thing of like, holy shit, people are actually like listening to everything that I put out. And like, I should just like keep this going if I can. And I probably wouldn't have if I didn't keep getting like more and more and more releases submitted and stuff, and talking to more and more people and seeing what they were doing in my town and other local places. So yeah, like Johnny G is like a Seattle connection too. So that was kind of a cool, I'm from Seattle originally, but I'm like completely divorced. I don't know a lot of what's going on up there these days. Cause with the city turning into like the new San Francisco, like every band that I knew back in the day has moved away at this point.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I see. Yeah.
But yeah, so I can't remember your question.
This is like sustaining that entrepreneurial seizure of 2020 into 2021, 22, 23.
Totally. Yeah. So I just kind of kept it going, and I was trying to figure out ways to kind of fit it into my actual like everyday life. Once like real life came back, it was like, okay, I'm lucky enough where I only work like 4 days a week now at my job, and I can pay my rent, and I'm not like dependent on the label at all for paying my rent. So I will usually just kind of like, have one day where I just kind of like stamp tapes, answer some emails, upload stuff to Bandcamp, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's a little more chaotic than that. It's sometimes I'm like scrambling and getting stuff ready at the last minute.
Well, speaking of chaos, do you have like a release capacity in the back of your mind, or an official? I'm guessing the answer is no.
That's something that I'm finally starting to tap on. Like this summer has decimated me. Like I've set myself up for total failure.
Oh my gosh.
I've been putting out a release every 2 weeks all summer.
Man.
And I'm doing that for like another month or 2 or 3 at this point. Starting in October, I'm putting a cap, and I'm only doing one release per month.
Good for you.
And then beyond that into 2024, I'm going to try and do only one release every 2 months. Because I really overdid it with this year. This summer just got so busy, and like so many people having had records that were waiting to come out, and then people are going to move away. So they're trying to like put out a record and have a release show before they leave. And it's like all kinds of that kind of stuff. So I've been scrambling, fitting it all together. But so the short answer is yes, I've finally started to do that, but I did not for the longest time. I just kind of was like, oh yeah, we got an open Friday here. We'll just throw it in there.
I did the same thing. What's the consequences of that? And I want to ask you, consequences not to you, because our listeners don't care about you. They want to know the consequences to the label and to the releases.
Right, totally. I think
no disrespect.
I think what I've noticed is there is like a fatigue that comes along with putting out so many releases to the listener.
Right.
You know, like I'm just putting out too much stuff for people to keep up with. You know.
Yeah.
A real good example of that I've noticed too is my friend Aaron, who I've put out a couple of his albums. He's one of those people that's so prolific that he has like 4 or 5 different projects, and he's always putting out a new thing like once a month. It seems like. Right. Ghost Pop and Balloon Club are the 2 that I've put out releases from. And he has just been going crazy on Ghost Pop in the last year, like putting out. I think he put out like 9 records in 2021, and then he put out like 8 records last year or something crazy like that. It's been an insane time for his, or it was 2022, he put out 9 records, and he's already put out like at least 6 records this year. Anyway, and there is a fatigue that comes along with that, he was noticing, where it's like, nobody's really listening to my records anymore because I put out way too many of them. And I think that is kind of where I'm at too. Like I've just kind of fatigued my listeners at the end of the day. Nobody has time to listen to like, 2 whole records a month and figure out if they're good.
That's
one
it.
Small
it's
place,
time. I have, when you add videos to your YouTube watch later, or you add articles that you save, I got to read this. You have books stacked up in your nightstand. Like my recently added section in iTunes, I feel the same way. It's kind of stressing me out. It's like having emails I need to respond to.
Right.
And
totally.
and every Friday I'm like, I got to really listen to this record. And it's funny, eh? Like it's weird.
It is funny. Yeah. And I have a lot of that too with like, it's hard, especially with experimental music too, because like even like my partner my life partner who I live with, it's like she doesn't want to hear like freaking like noise at like 11 a.m.
You have to find the time to go through that, right?
Yeah, it's like I'm starting to set like like headphone listening times with my stereo, because I've got a physical record that it's like I bought this a month ago and I still haven't listened to it. It's the time to listen. So I totally get that. Yeah, and I'm kind of realizing that I need to give people time to like listen to records and also like find them too. It's like I gotta give like some records some breathing room for people to like discover them and then want to make the time to actually sit with them and listen to them.
Do you think the artists felt like they were an old hat a week after their album came out if you're promoting another record?
Right, totally. And I worry about that too. But I think that's kind of that's just the current state of the music industry these days.
Agreed.
Like it's so crazy how quickly things move on, and we're on to the next PR cycle. It's like crazy. I don't do any of that. Luckily, I'm like completely out of the game when it comes to PR. Like I send the occasional free download code to blogs,
sure.
And I'll send some emails if it's like, I'm like, oh, this blog really liked this release, so it seems like they would probably like this one. I'll like send them a free download code and a little like mini press pack or whatever. But I really don't do a lot of the like really intense PR rollout that a lot of people do. And I've noticed like just looking through, my friends' bands from, early 2010s through the end of the 2010s, that movement out of the blogosphere has been so crazy. Like, that really rigid, like 3 singles and then an album, and there'd be premieres for everyone. Now people still try to do that, but then nobody's listening to blogs or like reading blogs anymore, except for like, very niche ones. There's like real cool ones like Aquarium Drunkard and that kind of stuff that like everyone tunes into. But other than that, it's like really it's not the same landscape that we're looking at anymore. And I've kind of honestly been left in the dust in that respect. I don't really know how people are doing it anymore. But yeah, having a record have a life after it comes out is really difficult nowadays because everyone's moving on to the next thing so quickly.
Well, I think I'm going to click your follow button right now, but I think, yes, please. I think that my point in that little illustration is like, I think the Bandcamp following is like one of our best tools because it's like, even if I hear about one of your releases from a blog, should that happen, which is hard to do and rare, I still may not know it's from you. And,
Yeah, totally.
And oftentimes I will get a notification on Bandcamp and I'll be like, I don't know who this is. Why am I getting this notification? So I click through and I see on their label or in their discography, oh, I remember that record. I love them. I don't know their name. And then I check it out. So I feel like that could happen too, or that is happening with you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of the main way that, I'm selling, albums these days is just through my mail email list that I have on Bandcamp.
Sure.
And my Instagram, So it's a lot of people just kind of following what I'm doing, maybe or maybe not. There's not really a lot of outside influence going on in that respect, other than a couple of really cool blogs like Very Small Flames is always really, really helpful with our releases.
Sure.
They've
Love
covered
them.
a lot
Love
of really
them.
good stuff.
Yeah.
Super great blog that has really stood the test of time, and they
100%.
cover a lot of really cool stuff.
Yeah.
And some other ones too, like Start Track is like the new one from the
Of course,
guy who did
from
Z2.
Philip. Yeah. Yeah. And go ahead.
No, yeah, that was pretty much it. There are still some really cool blogs who are doing real good stuff, and just wanted to shout them out because they do help
I appreciate
us out a lot
that
from time to time.
And
I will see that like when they cover something, more people will listen to it and that kind of stuff. So not to say that there's no influence that they hold anymore.
I want to just say too, because I completely agree with you, and you've mentioned some that have covered my work and tiny albums as well. And what I want to say about these people is that the move away from blogs, from discovering music on blogs or reading on blogs, had nothing to do, in most part, from the quality of the blogs or the blogs themselves. It had nothing to do with the fact that I don't like this model, doesn't work for me. I think the problem is that because of Twitter, Instagram stories, things just started happening way quicker. And so we didn't have time to kind of let's check a blog on Saturday and say, what did they write about this week? Stuff had to be and I don't think the blogs could do the work that they do so well, which is listen to the record, write a great piece about the record. They can't keep up, I don't think, with our appetite as music fans.
Yeah, and not to harp on the usual just anti-streaming sentiment or whatever, but yeah, streaming had a big part in that too, of people have now access to pretty much a majority of all recorded music at any point, and an algorithm is always feeding them new things, regardless of if they're actually new or have recently come out or not. And so to keep up with the algorithm constantly feeding you new things, and then to have the inclination to then be like, I want to look for new music elsewhere, is real difficult for people that are fully in that loop that Spotify gets you into. I'm lucky in that I try to exist outside of that as much as possible, and try to be a not algorithm controlled person, but I totally empathize with people where it's that's just a super easy way to figure out and find new music all the time. It's never been easier before to do that. But the problem is, in my opinion, is that is a corporate influenced
100%
algorithm and requesting and recommending things. I don't want a corporation to decide what I'm listening to. I want people to decide. I want someone who is putting out the records, someone who's listening to the records and liking them, not people who, have all sorts of nefarious reasons for recommending albums and things.
It reminds me of when I talk about how to eat healthy, if you want to eat healthy, it's actually really hard work, because you go into the grocery store and the flashy things and the easily accessible things, that's not the healthy stuff. And then to actually get a healthy meal, you have to go and buy a bunch of raw goods that don't have a label or a cartoon character on it, take them home, and then figure out how to combine them, wait an hour, and eat them. You know what I mean? So I feel the same way in the music industry. Luckily, in the music industry, because I'm in it, I am able to pause and say, okay, no, let's take a half hour, go to Bandcamp, or let's check what my friends are sharing. I follow a couple of really cool people that I think I respect their tastes, and they
Right.
share old records or new records on their Instagram stories. And I'm thankful for that. I don't know where the
Right.
rest of I don't know what other people are doing, what passive listeners are doing, but
Right.
I guess you can only hope that the algorithm is feeding them some cool, unique stuff.
Yeah,
Hopefully.
And that's not to say that it doesn't, because
Yeah.
you know it is actually, you know, much easier now for random kids, you know, on the internet to just kind of randomly find people's records and really
Yes.
connect with them. Like,
That is
I don't
true.
want to like disparage that aspect of it, because that aspect is really cool.
Yes.
And you know, randomly you'll just have this kid from middle of nowhere, you know, Kansas, who now is listening to like slowcore from Canada that they really like,
Yeah,
or whatever.
yeah,
You know,
that's
some
right.
small band from Canada that's really
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
And that wouldn't have happened otherwise. But also, I do want to say, like in my personal listening now, I'm super lucky. Like we were talking about earlier, there's lots of really cool record labels in Portland, and therefore there are lots of really cool record stores in Portland too.
Oh, good point.
So
Little shout
you know,
out.
like shouting out, especially Mississippi Records, who are both a record store and a record label here in town. Eric does like insane work, and my friend Frankie has been helping with the shop a lot recently. Just like they are something that completely exists outside of our current idea of what consuming music is. Like, it's pretty much just you go to the record store, you buy their record, and you bring it home and put it on your turntable and listen to it.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
Yeah.
you could take that record and listen to it in the record store before you decide to listen to it. And
Yeah.
I think now they do have a Bandcamp, but for the longest time they didn't even have that.
Wow.
And they're super cool, and you can literally just anything that you see that has a Mississippi Records, like that they put it out, you're just like, I have no idea what this is, but I'm gonna buy it because it's gonna be cool. You know,
That's amazing.
There's
Yeah.
nothing like that feeling of just kind of like going into a physical place, seeing a physical item that looks cool, seeing that someone you know put it out, and you're just like, I'm buying this. This shit's gonna be really cool.
I love that. I love getting to that point with certain labels.
Yeah, totally. Like, especially shout out this. They don't usually put out new stuff. Like they put out the occasional new record, but they're usually putting like archival releases out.
Yeah.
But this new band in Portland called Roman Norfleet and the Be Present Art Group, they're a local spiritual jazz group that are
Okay.
like young folks doing spiritual jazz, and it is so cool. And their
Okay.
new record that Mississippi Records just put out is incredible, and I just bought it sight unseen and listened to it, and it just like changed my whole brain. It,
Okay,
like,
I'm gonna
rearranged
check it out today.
Yeah, you definitely.
That's
If you're
awesome.
into spiritual jazz or any jazz or just
Yeah,
kind of like
for sure.
interesting music at all, it's like it's a must listen for sure.
What do you, I'm going to let you go. What do you consider to be success? Are you successful with BudTapes?
That's always a really good question. I think, and I've kind of adjusted my idea of success.
Yeah.
I think that I'm successful in that I'm still doing it, and I'm not, you know, I'm just still putting out records. Some people are still listening to them. I sell the occasional tape, and I get to help. At the end of the day, success for me is just being able to connect people that I like their music with other people that I like their music, and have them kind of exist in the same system together. And maybe then they build personal connections as well through that. That's like where I really feel is success. You know, like I put out a band, they come to Portland and play with another band who's on the label, and they make a connection and are like, hey, we were both on BudTapes. Like that, at the end of the day, that's like my success for sure.
Amazing.
And that's kind of the, like, you know, I'm not doing this for money. Like I said, I'm not doing this for fame. Like, I'm doing it for love of the game and to like build communities. So,
Amazing.
yeah.
Thank you so much for doing this. It's been so great to chat with you.
Of course, Scott. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on and everything. I really appreciate it.